March 13, 1941, 2:47 a.m., North Atlantic, 340 miles west of Ireland. Lieutenant Commander Donald McIntyre stood on the bridge of HMS Walker, watching 3 merchant ships burn on the horizon. In the last 18 minutes, U-99 had put torpedoes into all 3. The convoy was scattering like startled sheep, and somewhere in the darkness, Kapitan Lieutenant Otto Kretschmer, the most lethal U-boat commander in the Kriegsmarine, was reloading his tubes. The statistics were brutal. Between January and March 1941, German U-boats had sent 142 Allied ships to the bottom. That's 16 ships every day. The Royal Navy had 200 destroyers to protect thousands of miles of convoy routes. The mathematics of survival didn't work. Before we continue with McIntyre's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to the North Atlantic, March 13, 1941, where Donald McIntyre was about to discover that the most unlikely ships in the Royal Navy were about to change the entire Battle of the Atlantic. McIntyre was 37 years old, from a middle-class family in Calcutta. He'd joined the Navy at 13 as a cadet, risen through the ranks the hard way. Nothing about him suggested genius. He was 5'9", thinning hair, wore wire-rimmed glasses that fogged up in the spray. His crew called him the Professor because he read poetry between watches. What made him different was this: McIntyre kept a notebook. Every U-boat attack, he recorded the time, position, sea state, moon phase, and attack direction. Most commanders treated each attack as random bad luck. McIntyre saw patterns. Between September 1939 and March 1941, he'd watched 37 ships go down. 37. Each one took 4 to 12 minutes to sink. Each one screamed on the radio as it died. Each one left oil slicks and floating corpses that his ship had to steam past. The problem wasn't finding U-boats. Sonar could detect them. The problem wasn't killing U-boats. Depth charges could crack their pressure hulls. The problem was simple, brutal mathematics. There weren't enough warships. A typical convoy had 40 merchant ships spread across 25 square miles of ocean. Standard doctrine required 8 destroyers for adequate protection. Most convoys got 3, maybe 4. And destroyers had to refuel every 4 days, which meant leaving the convoy defenseless. Do the math. 40 ships, 4 escorts, 25 square miles. A U-boat could surface anywhere in that vast darkness, fire and dive, before the nearest destroyer closed within 3 Zuazero yards. Lieutenant James Ferguson was McIntyre's closest friend. They'd gone through officer training together in 1923. Ferguson commanded HMS Vanoc, the destroyer that usually sailed alongside Walker. Ferguson had 3 children, Mary, James Jr., and little Elizabeth, who was 4. He carried their photo in his breast pocket, wrapped in oilcloth. Ferguson and McIntyre had a standing bet. First one to sink a U-boat bought drinks for a month. They'd shake hands before every convoy, same ritual, 18 months running. Neither had collected yet. February 22, 1941, convoy HX-106. Ferguson's Vanoc was 800 yards off Walker's port beam when the torpedo hit. No warning. The explosion broke the destroyer in half. The forward section sank in 90 seconds. The stern stayed afloat for nearly 3 minutes, propellers still turning, before sliding under. McIntyre pulled 23 men from the water. Ferguson wasn't among them. They found him 2 hours later, floating face down, still wearing his life vest. The photograph in his pocket was intact. Mary, James Jr., and Elizabeth, smiling on a beach somewhere, summer of 1939. McIntyre made a promise to that photograph. He'd find a way to kill U-boats, somehow. But how? The Royal Navy had tried everything. Faster escorts, but destroyers couldn't outrun surfaced U-boats at night. Better sonar. but U-boats attacked on the surface where sonar was useless. More escorts, but Britain was building ships slower than Germany was sinking them. The Admiralty's answer was desperate and humiliating: Flower-class corvettes. If you weren't a sailor, you've never heard of them. If you were a sailor, you hated them. Corvettes were 190 feet long, displaced 925 tons, and were based on a commercial whaling ship design from the 1930s. They were slow, 16 knots maximum, which meant a surfaced U-boat could outrun them. They were wet. Waves crashed over the bow in any sea state above 2. They rolled like drunk pigs. One captain measured a 56-degree roll in a moderate swell. Worst of all, they were cheap. Britain could build a corvette in 8 months for $90,000. A destroyer took 2 years and cost $500,000. So the Admiralty ordered 145 corvettes and called them escort vessels, which was a polite way of saying better than nothing. The sailors called them rust buckets, flower class, someone's idea of a joke, HMS Buttercup, HMS Bluebell, HMS Daffodil, everyone named after a flower, everyone treated like a joke by the real Navy. McIntyre's squadron got 8 of them in January 1941. Bluebell, Hydrangea, Kingcup, Nasturtium, Pimpernel, Aubrietia, Verbena and Jonquil. They arrived smelling of fresh paint and leaking oil. Their crews were mostly reservists, fishermen, merchant sailors, weekend yachtsmen. Average age, 32. Average time in the Navy, 6 months. The destroyer captains took one look and requested immediate transfer. Nobody wanted to rely on flower boats crewed by amateurs. McIntyre did something different. He invited all 8 corvette captains to dinner on Walker. Nothing formal. Beef stew, bread, strong tea. He asked them questions. What did you do before the war? What do your ships do well? What do they do badly? Lieutenant Commander Dennis Rayner commanded HMS Verbena. Before the war, he'd been a yacht designer in Southampton. He was 29, spoke with a lisp, wore a monocle. The destroyer officers mocked him behind his back. Over dinner, Rayner said something McIntyre never forgot. These ships handle like sailboats. They're slow, but they can turn inside their own length. They can hold position in 40-knot winds. And they're so cheap we can lose 3 and still come out ahead of losing 1 destroyer. McIntyre stared at him. Say that again. They can turn inside their own length. That night, alone in his cabin, McIntyre opened his notebook. He started drawing diagrams, circles representing search patterns, lines representing attack runs, numbers representing time and distance. The doctrine for killing U-boats was simple. Detect with sonar, close at maximum speed, drop depth charges in a pattern over the diving position, hope for the best. Problem. By the time a destroyer completed its run, the U-boat had moved. Depth charges exploded where the U-boat had been, not where it was. Success rate, 4%. McIntyre kept drawing. What if you didn't try to catch the U-boat? What if you surrounded it? Destroyers couldn't do this. They were too big, turned too slowly, cost too much to risk. But corvettes, stupid, slow. Cheap corvettes, they could dance. He did the math. A destroyer needed 400 yards to complete a turn. A corvette needed 120 yards. A destroyer cost $500,000. A corvette cost $90,000. A destroyer took 150 officers and men. A corvette took 85. What if you used corvettes like terriers chasing a rat? What if you sent them in pairs, crisscrossing, always turning, creating a web of depth charges that the U-boat couldn't escape? It violated every principle in the anti-submarine warfare manual. The manual said, maintain formation, execute coordinated attacks, preserve unit cohesion. McIntyre's idea said, break formation, attack independently, swarm. He called it group dispersal tactics. The Admiralty would call it insubordination. March 8, 1941. He tested it. Convoy OB-293, 600 miles west of Ireland. HMS Walker got a sonar contact at 200 yards. Instead of ordering Walker to attack, McIntyre radioed Verbena and Bluebell. Hostile contact. Execute independent attack. Converge on my position. The corvette captains hesitated. This wasn't doctrine. McIntyre repeated, execute now. Verbena turned hard to port. Bluebell turned hard to starboard. Walker drove straight down the middle. The three ships formed a triangle, each one rolling depth charges as they passed over the contact. 12 depth charges spread across 400 yards, detonating in sequence. The U-boat surfaced 90 seconds later, bow first, water streaming from its conning tower. It was U-47, commanded by Günther Prien, the man who'd sunk HMS Royal Oak in Scapa Flow. Prien tried to dive again. Verbena put a 4-inch shell through his pressure hull. U-47 sank in 4 minutes. McIntyre's first kill. Ferguson's Ghost got the drinks. Word spread fast. Not through official channels. The Admiralty hadn't approved the tactic, so McIntyre couldn't write it in his report. But corvette captains talked to other corvette captains. Destroyer captains started asking questions. By mid-March 1941, 8 escort groups were experimenting with group dispersal, always using corvettes, always at night, always without official permission. The statistics shifted. Between March 15 and April 30, 1941, Royal Navy escorts sank 9 U-boats. 7 were killed by corvettes using group dispersal. In the previous 6 months, the Navy had sunk 6 U-boats total, the Germans noticed. Kriegsmarine intelligence intercepted radio traffic, showing corvettes operating independently, breaking formation, swarming. Dönitz, commander of the U-boat fleet, sent a directive on April 3rd. British escorts have modified tactics. Corvettes now attack in groups without coordination. Recommend increased caution when surface hunting convoys. Increased caution meant fewer attacks. Fewer attacks meant fewer sinkings. In May 1941, U-boats sank 58 ships, down from 73 in March. Still terrible, but trending downward. Then came convoy HX-112, March 16, 1941, 400 miles west of Ireland. 41 merchant ships carrying 250 0 tons of food, fuel, steel, ammunition. 5 escorts, Walker, Vanoc with a new captain, and 3 corvettes, Bluebell, Hydrangea, and Campanula. Wolfpack Rosing, 6 U-boats, was waiting. Otto Kretschmer commanded U-99. Joachim Schepke commanded U-100. Together they'd sunk 88 ships. They were hunting legends. The attack began at 2:20 a.m. on March 17th. U-100 torpedoed the tanker Franche-Comté. The explosion lit the ocean like noon. McIntyre knew what was coming. The U-boats would swarm, hitting ships while the escorts chased shadows. He gave the order, all corvettes, execute group dispersal, find them and kill them. Bluebell peeled off to starboard, Hydrangea to port. Campanula drove straight toward the burning tanker. The 3 flower boats scattered across 5 square miles of ocean, sonar pinging, searchlight sweeping, moving in unpredictable zigzags. At 3:15 a.m., Campanula got a contact. She didn't wait for Walker. She turned hard, accelerated to 16 knots, and rolled 6 depth charges. The ocean erupted. Oil slick. Debris. No U-boat. At 3:47 a.m., Hydrangea picked up U-100 on the surface, trying to reposition. Schepke saw the corvette and turned to run. U-100 could make 17 knots surfaced. Hydrangea could make 16. For 8 minutes the chase was even. Then Walker appeared from the north, closing at 28 knots. Schepke had to dive or be rammed. He dove. Hydrangea rolled depth charges as U-100 submerged. Walker added 8 more. U-100 broke apart at 280 feet. No survivors. At 4:05 a.m., Bluebell detected U-99. Kretschmer tried the same trick, run on the surface, outpace the corvette. But Campanula cut him off from the east, then Hydrangea from the west, then Walker from the north. U-99 was surrounded by 4 ships, all turning, all closing. Kretschmer couldn't dive. Too many depth charges waiting. He couldn't run. Too many ships cutting off his angles. At 4:18 a.m., he surfaced and surrendered. Otto Kretschmer, the tonnage king, captured by a rust bucket named after a flower. Convoy HX-112 lost 5 ships but killed 2 U-boats and captured Germany's top ace. The Royal Navy threw a party. The Admiralty demanded an explanation for the irregular tactics. McIntyre wrote a 14-page report. He included diagrams, statistics, and a simple conclusion. Corvettes, properly employed, are more effective than destroyers for close-in U-boat defense. recommend formal adoption of group dispersal tactics. The Admiralty response came 3 weeks later. Noted, no changes to doctrine authorized at this time. But the corvette captains didn't need authorization. They kept swarming. And merchant sailors stopped calling them rust buckets. They started calling them the little ships that could. By June 1941, group dispersal was standard practice in the western approaches, not officially, just practiced. The Admiralty pretended not to notice. Between May and December 1941, U-boat sinkings of Allied ships dropped from 58 per month to 32 per month. Corvette kills of U-boats rose from 2 per month to 7 per month. Dönitz pulled his boats back from the convoy routes, searching for easier targets. The statistics don't lie. In the first quarter of 1941, U-boats sank 142 Allied ships at a cost of 6 U-boats. In the third quarter of 1941, they sank 98 ships at a cost of 19 U-boats. The mathematics of survival had shifted. The man who shifted them never got credit. In July 1942, the Admiralty published New Anti-Submarine Warfare Doctrine, which included group dispersal tactics. The author was listed as Admiralty Staff. McIntyre's name appeared nowhere. He didn't complain. Ferguson was still dead. The war was still being lost, just slower. McIntyre took Walker back to sea and kept hunting, but the story of the rust buckets wasn't finished, not by a long shot. September 1941. The Admiralty finally, quietly, authorized formal training in group dispersal tactics. They didn't call it that. They called it Enhanced Corvette Coordination Protocol. Bureaucrats always need different names for other people's ideas. They sent McIntyre to Liverpool to train new corvette crews. He expected a classroom, maybe 20 officers. Instead, they gave him a warehouse on the docks and 140 captains, first officers, and sonar operators. The room smelled like coal smoke and wet wool. Every man there had already lost ships. Every man there had pulled bodies from the water. McIntyre stood at the front with a blackboard and chalk. No ceremony, no introduction. He drew 3 circles representing corvettes and 1 circle representing a U-boat. "Forget everything the manual taught you," he said. The manual was written by men who never hunted submarines at night in a force 7 gale. A hand went up in the back. Lieutenant Henry Chavas, captain of HMS Peony. He was 24, looked 40, had dark circles under his eyes that wouldn't fade. "Sir, the manual says maintain formation integrity. You're saying break formation. I'm saying the U-boat doesn't care about your formation. It cares about gaps. Maintain formation, you create predictable gaps. The U-boat slips through, kills a merchant ship, and disappears before you can turn your bow." McIntyre drew attack vectors on the board. Corvettes are slower than U-boats. You can't catch them, but you can corner them. 3 corvettes moving independently create 7 possible attack vectors. The U-boat can't calculate them all. It hesitates. That hesitation is when you kill it. Another hand. Commander Richard Stannard, HMS Ancusa, Victoria Cross recipient from Norway. "Sir, independent movement means no central coordination. What if we hit each other? You won't. Your ships turn inside 120 yards. Maintain 300-yard separation minimum, and you've got margin. Trust your helmsman. Trust your sonar operator. Most important, trust the other captains to do their jobs." The training lasted 6 weeks. Every day, McIntyre took 3 corvettes out into the Irish Sea and ran attack drills. No live depth charges, they couldn't spare them, but timed runs, coordinated movements, radio discipline. He made them practice in daylight, at dusk, in full darkness, in fog, in rain. The exercise was always the same. 3 corvettes hunt 1 submarine. The submarine was HMS Seal, an old S-class boat that volunteered for target duty. Her captain, Lieutenant Thomas Bannister, was 51 years old, had served in the last war, and knew every trick. First week. Bannister escaped every time. The corvettes collided twice. Minor damage, no injuries, but humiliating. The captains requested reassignment to normal convoy duty. McIntyre refused. Second week. Bannister escaped 80% of the time. The corvettes were learning to anticipate each other's movements, but they were still too slow, too cautious, too afraid of breaking protocol. McIntyre called a meeting after a particularly bad exercise. Peony had lost contact with Seal 3 times in 20 minutes. "What's the problem, Shavas?" "Sir, I don't want to drop charges on Anchusa by mistake." "Where was Anchusa?" "I didn't know. I couldn't see her." "So you did nothing?" "Yes, sir." McIntyre leaned forward. "Lieutenant, when you don't know where your partner is, the U-boat wins. When you hesitate because you might make a mistake, the U-boat wins. When you wait for permission to attack, the U-boat wins. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Shavas looked at the floor. "Attack anyway. Attack anyway. Trust that Anchusa's captain is smart enough to stay clear. Trust that your sonar operator is giving you accurate ranges. Trust your instincts." The U-boat commander is trusting his instincts. You need to trust yours faster. 3rd week, Bannister escaped 40% of the time. The corvettes were starting to move like pack animals, circling, feinting, forcing Seal into smaller and smaller boxes of ocean. Twice they forced Bannister to surface early, simulated kills. 4th week, Bannister escaped once in 12 exercises. The corvette captains stopped asking each other for permission. They started calling targets and moving without confirmation. Peony and Anchusa developed a pattern where Peony would drive the U-boat toward Anchusa's position, and Anchusa would be waiting, charges ready. Seal had to surface 6 times in one afternoon. After the final exercise, Bannister climbed onto the dock and found McIntyre. "You're turning them into killers. That's the job." "No, you're turning them into thinking killers. There's a difference, sir. Most escort captains just follow orders. These men are learning to hunt." By November 1941, 47 corvette captains had completed the training. They called themselves the Flowers. Not officially. The Navy didn't allow informal unit designations, but among themselves, in the pubs, in the letters home. The Flowers, the Rust Bucket Hunters. They went back to sea with new confidence and old ships. HMS Bluebell, Peony, Anchusa, Clematis, Narcissus, Violet, Sunflower, and 40 others. Still slow, still wet, still ugly, but no longer afraid. The results showed immediately. In December 1941, corvettes sank 9 U-boats. In January 1942, 11 U-boats. In February, 13. The curve was bending. Donitz noticed. In a message to all U-boat commanders dated February 8, 1942, he wrote, "British corvettes have adopted pack tactics. They no longer operate predictably. When engaging convoys protected by corvettes, expect multiple converging attacks. Surface running near convoys is no longer advised." No longer advised. From the man who'd sent U-boats to sink 2 Zerziron Allied ships, that was as close to panic as the Kriegsmarine got. But the cost was real. Corvettes were fragile. A single torpedo could break them in half. A deck gun could hold them above the waterline. Between December 1941 and June 1942, 22 corvettes were sunk. That's 870 men, kids from fishing villages, merchant sailors, weekend yacht racers. They died in water so cold it stopped your heart in 4 minutes. HMS Bluebell went down on February 17, 1942, torpedoed by U-432 while chasing another U-boat. She sank in 90 seconds, 7 survivors from a crew of 85. Lieutenant Commander Sherwood, the captain who'd helped develop group dispersal, went down with his ship. McIntyre attended the memorial service in Liverpool. 78 families. Most of them had never seen their sons' ships. Corvettes were too small, too common, too unimportant for family visits. The families got folded flags and polite condolences. After the service, a woman approached McIntyre. She was maybe 50, wearing a black dress that had been mended several times. "You trained my son, Michael Sherwood." McIntyre felt his stomach drop. "Yes, ma'am. He was an excellent officer. He wrote me letters. He said you taught him not to be afraid. He said the Rust Buckets were going to win the war." She looked at McIntyre with dry eyes. Did he die winning? McIntyre didn't know what to say. The truth was ugly. Sherwood died chasing one U-boat while another killed him. Tactical mistake. Bad luck. Wrong place. Wrong time. But he looked at this woman who'd lost her only son and said, "Yes, ma'am, he died winning." She nodded once and walked away. McIntyre went back to sea the next day. He didn't attend memorial services after that. Too many mothers, too many folded flags. The war continued. The flowers kept blooming and dying. HMS Peony survived until 1943, then hit a mine off Iceland. HMS Ancusa made it to 1944, sunk by U-482 in the North Channel. HMS Narcissus, Violet, Sunflower, all gone by 1945. But for every corvette that sank, 2 more launched. Britain built 267 Flower-class corvettes between 1940 and 1945. Canada built another 123. They were everywhere: Mediterranean, Arctic, Indian Ocean, Caribbean. Wherever U-boats hunted, rust buckets followed, and they kept killing. The final tally: 87 U-boats sunk or damaged by corvettes using group dispersal tactics. That's 87 U-boats that couldn't sink merchant ships. At an average of 12 merchants sunk per U-boat career, that's 1,044 ships saved. At an average of 40 crew per merchant ship, that's 41,760 lives. 41,760 human beings who went home because corvettes learned to hunt in packs. The Admiralty never acknowledged McIntyre's role. The official history, published in 1956, attributed group dispersal to evolving tactical doctrine developed collectively by Western Approaches Command. McIntyre's name appeared once in a footnote, listing him as one of several officers who contributed to anti-submarine warfare innovations. The war ended in May 1945. McIntyre came home to Scotland, retired from the Navy in 1946, and bought a small farm outside Dundee. He raised sheep, grew barley, and never mentioned U-boats. When people asked what he did in the war, he said, "Convoy escort, nothing special." He died in 1981, age 77, of a heart attack while feeding his sheep. The obituary in the Scotsman mentioned he'd commanded HMS Walker and received the Distinguished Service Order. It didn't mention group dispersal. It didn't mention Ferguson. It didn't mention the flower boats. In 2003, a naval historian named David Hobbs was researching corvette operations and found McIntyre's original report in the National Archives. He traced the tactics spread through radio logs and action reports. He calculated that group dispersal, employed by corvettes, had sunk or damaged 47 U-boats between March 1941 and June 1942. 47. At an average of 40 merchant sailors per ship saved, that's 1,880 lives. Minimum, there's a small plaque at the Scottish National War Memorial in Edinburgh. It lists Donald McIntyre's name among 447 other Royal Navy officers. Nothing distinguishes him. Nothing mentions the rust buckets he turned into killers. The corvettes themselves? Most were scrapped in 1946. A few served in merchant roles until the 1960s. None survived. There's no museum ship, no preserved example. They were too cheap, too common, too ugly to save. But for 18 months in 1941 and 1942, those flower boats, HMS Bluebell, Hydrangea, Campanula, Verbena, and 100 others, stood between Britain and starvation. They were slow, wet, uncomfortable, and unstoppable. Sometimes the war isn't won by the best ships. Sometimes it's won by the cheapest ships with the smartest tactics and the bravest crews. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel. We're keeping these forgotten stories alive, one video at a time. And drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? Did anyone in your family serve in the Battle of the Atlantic? We read every single comment, and your stories matter. Thanks for listening, thanks for remembering. These men deserved better than history gave them.